She walked 12 miles to sell 3 pies. He bought them all and asked her to stay. The first thing I noticed was her shoes. Not her shoes. One of them had a piece of leather sole flapping loose at the toe, tied back against the upper with a strip of something that might have been rawhide or might have been a cut-off bootlace. It was hard to tell. The knot was tight and deliberate. Whoever tied it knew what they were doing, or at least knew they were going to have to walk on it, and had done the best they could with what they had. I was sitting on the steps of the Harlow trading post when she came up the road from the south. The road from the south was not really a road in any sense that required a road. It was 2 ruts in the dirt that wagons had worn down over years, and between those ruts the scrub grass still grew, which told you something about how little traffic used it. She was walking between the ruts. She had a basket on each arm, cloth-covered, and she was walking in that particular way that tells you a person's feet hurt, but they've decided not to allow their feet to have any say in the matter. I watched her come. There was nothing else to watch. Harlow in July was a dry place and a still one. The mountains 30 miles west through an afternoon shadow that didn't reach you until 5, and until then the light was white and flat and it bounced off everything and made your eyes hurt. The trading post had one cottonwood tree next to it that gave about 8 feet of shade, and I had positioned myself in that shade at roughly 2 in the afternoon, which was where I still was when she walked up. She went straight for the door, didn't look at me. Inside I heard the bell over the door, then voices, hers and old Cleet's raspy one. I couldn't hear what was being said. After a few minutes, the bell again, and she came back out onto the step. She stood there in the sun and looked down the road north, and she had the baskets still on her arms. I said he didn't want them. She looked at me then. She was maybe 30, dark-haired, with the kind of face that's been in the sun long enough that you'd call it weathered on a man, but on a woman you just notice that her eyes are pale, and the lines around them are real and not decorative. She had a look on her that was not quite hostile, more like someone who has decided, as a general policy, to assume the worst so as not to be surprised by it. No, she said, he didn't want them. What are they? She looked at the baskets, pies. What kind? 2 apple, 1 blackberry. I said, how far do you walk? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, far enough. I had a ranch 12 miles south of Harlow, which meant I knew exactly what 12 miles of that road felt like in July on a good day, and I had a horse and she didn't, and the loose sole on her shoe was a fact that I could not stop thinking about. I said, how much does he pay for a pie when he does want them? 20 cents. I'll give you $1 for all 3. She looked at me the way you'd look at a man who just told you the sun rises in the west. Not angry, just waiting for the part where it made sense. I said, I'm not being charitable. I haven't had a pie in 4 months and I'd rather have 3 than none. She said, $1 for 3 pies is 33 cents each. That's more than he pays. I know what it is. I can do the arithmetic. She set the baskets down on the step and looked at me again, more carefully this time. Why? Because I want the pies. You don't know me. I don't have to know you to know I want the pies. Something moved in her face. Not a smile, not quite. The closest word I have for it, looking back, is that she made a decision. She picked up one of the cloths and showed me what was underneath, which was a pie in a tin, the crust crimped tight and even around the rim, the vent slashes in the top in a pattern that was neat and intentional. You can tell a lot about a person from their pie crust. I gave her the $1. She counted it and put it in her dress pocket. I said, what's your name? Marin Cole. Elias Tate. I've got a ranch south of here, the one back of the Penter Creek Bend. Where are you headed? She picked up the baskets, empty now, and looked up the road north. I was going to see if anyone in town wanted them. She stopped, looked at the baskets. It occurred to me that she hadn't entirely thought past this point, or rather, she had, and what she'd thought was 20 cents times 3, and the road back to wherever she'd come from, and now neither of those 2 things was what she'd planned for. I said, I need someone who can cook. She looked at me. I don't mean that the way it might sound, I said. I run the place alone. My wife died 2 years back. I've got a house that's too big for one person and a bunkhouse that's empty because I can't afford to hire on, and a cook operation that amounts to me boiling beef and burning corn cakes 4 days out of 7. I'm not a charity and I'm not asking for charity. I'm saying I'd pay for someone who could cook and keep the house. You'd have your own room. The bunkhouse room at the end is separate, and it's got a door that locks from the inside. I'm telling you that so you understand I'm not asking for anything beyond what I said. The look she had then, I've thought about it many times since. It was the look of someone running a very fast calculation. The loose shoe sole against the locked door, the 12 miles back against the room of her own, whatever she'd come from against whatever I might turn out to be. She said, "How much?" $1.50 a week plus room and board. She said, "I need to think." "Take your time." She sat down on the step 2 feet away from me and put the empty baskets on her lap and looked out at the road. I looked at the cottonwood tree. We didn't speak for a while. What I haven't said yet is what the previous 2 years had been. I'll say it plainly because there's no other way to say it. My wife Ruth died in April of 1874. She had gone into labor 6 weeks early, and the baby, a boy, went with her. I buried them on the rise behind the barn on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday I was back working the cattle because the cattle don't know what day it is and don't care. That sounds harsh. It wasn't not feeling it. It was that there was nothing else to do, and doing nothing made the feeling worse, and the cattle needed to be worked, so I worked them. The ranch was Ruth's father's originally. We'd taken it on when he died, and she had been, in every practical sense, the person who made it run as a home rather than just a piece of land with cows on it. She knew what to plant and when, and she kept the ledgers, and she could stretch $4 worth of supplies into a week of good meals. And when the hands were on the place, she kept them fed and they worked better for it. After she died, I stopped being able to afford hands. Not because the money changed, but because the thing that had held it all together was gone. 2 years of eating badly and sleeping badly and getting the cattle to market and not doing a great deal else. The house was clean because I kept it clean. Ruth had kept it a certain way, and I had not been able to let it go otherwise, though I couldn't have told you why. I washed my own clothes. I fixed what broke. I kept the ledger in a hand that wasn't as neat as hers. I did not drink more than I had before, and I had not before. And I tell you that because men in my situation are sometimes supposed to turn to drinking, and I didn't see the point of it. I was fine, I was managing. That's the truest thing I know how to say about those 2 years. I was managing, and managing is not the same as living, but I had not quite decided yet whether living was available to me again or whether this was just what things were now. She said, sitting on that step, "My husband left me." She said it the way you say something to establish a fact, not to invite sympathy. When, I said, 7 months ago, we had a place 20 miles south. He left with the horse and a fair portion of what was in the house, and I haven't seen him since. She paused. I'm not lying to you if that matters. It matters. I've been staying with my neighbor, a widow woman, since then, helping her where I can. She taught me the pies. I thought if I could sell enough of them. She stopped again. Then I owe her for the flour and the lard. I owe her for 5 months of sleeping in her back room. She hasn't asked for it, but I owe it, and I know I owe it. I said, the $1'll get you square with the flour and lard. And then some, probably. Good. She turned and looked at me directly. You could be anyone. I could, I said. Cleet in there, he know you. I raised my voice, Cleet. The bell over the door and then Cleet himself, blinking in the white July light. He was a small, brown, wiry man about 65 who had been running the post since before I arrived in this country. I said, this woman wants to know if I'm a man she can trust. Cleet looked at her, then at me, then back at her. He said, Elias Tate is as straight a man as I know in this territory, and his wife was a good woman, and he's had a hard 2 years of it, and if he's offering you work then he means work and nothing else, and you could do worse. He squinted at her. You're the coal woman from the Dawson Road? I've heard of you. What have you heard? That you're proud and you work hard and your husband was a damned fool. He went back inside. She sat for another minute, then she said, all right. The first week she was at the ranch, she did not speak much, and I did not push her. She took the bunkhouse room and locked the door at night, and I heard the bolt go, and I was glad it was there, not because she needed protection from me, but because I knew she needed to hear it herself. The sound of a bolt you control is different from the sound of a door that can be opened from the outside. She found the kitchen the way it was and set about changing it without making a production of it. I came in the first morning to find she'd rearranged where things sat on the shelves, with the things I used most often in the front, and the things I almost never used pushed to the back. She did not ask permission for this. It was a practical improvement, and she made it. The first meal she cooked was biscuits and salt pork, and a pot of beans that had been seasoned in a way I hadn't tasted in 2 years. I sat at the table and ate, and I did not say much. She ate across from me with a directness that I appreciated, not looking at her plate, not performing anything, just eating because she was hungry and this was a meal. She said after a while, "The garden's a mess." "I know." "Ruth's garden," she said, not a question. "Yes. I won't touch it if you'd rather not." I said, "No, it should be worked." I looked at my hands. I couldn't do it myself, I don't know why." She nodded once, as if this was a reasonable thing to say, and didn't pursue it. The next morning she was in the garden at first light. I saw her from the barn, just beginning to see what was worth saving and what wasn't. She worked in that quiet way she had, methodical, not hurried. By afternoon, she'd cleared half of it. She didn't ask what Ruth had planted or where things went. She made her own decisions about it, and those decisions were good ones, which I found I was grateful for in a way I couldn't fully account for at the time. The thing that happened in the third week I should tell you about because it matters. A man rode up on a Thursday, late in the day. He had the look of someone who knows a piece of land and thinks he still has some claim on it. He didn't come to the house door, he came to the barn where I was working, and he sat his horse in a way that was meant to make a man look up and feel like the smaller party. He said he was looking for a woman named Marin Cole. I said I didn't know anyone by that name. He said she was his wife. I went on with what I was doing, which was running a file along a section of harness that had gotten rough. He sat there. I filed. After a little while he said something that I am not going to repeat because it concerns what he assumed about a woman living on a man's ranch alone, and the kind of man he took me for, and neither of those things are worth giving air to. I put the file down. I looked at him. I said, "You rode 20 miles to find out if a woman you left in a house alone is doing all right. And what you found when you got here is that she is. And I'd suggest that's your answer and you should take it and go." He said something else. I won't repeat that one either. I said, "You're on my land. You can get off it on your own, or I can help you get off it. And I'm going to tell you that I've been working cattle alone for 2 years, and there's not a soft spot on me. And I am not angry, I am just telling you what's available to you." He left. He went north, not south, so he didn't go back toward where he came from, but he went. I went to the house, and Marin was in the kitchen, and she was standing at the window, which faced the yard and the road, and she had seen him ride up. She knew who it was. She said, "What did you tell him?" That I didn't know anyone by that name. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in that look I won't try to describe because I don't have the right words for it. Not gratitude, exactly. Something older than that. The look of a person who has been understood by someone, maybe for the first time in a while, and is not sure how to hold that. She said, "He'll probably come back." "Probably. Will that be a problem for you?" I said no. She turned back to the stove. After a moment she said, "The biscuits will be ready in 10 minutes. I sat down at the table. By the end of the first month we had a working rhythm. I was up before her and out by the time she had the stove going, and I came in at midday for whatever she'd left on the back of the stove and went back out. And in the evenings we ate together and sometimes talked and sometimes didn't. She was a reader. She'd brought one book in a cloth bag, a novel I didn't know, and she read in the evenings with the lamp pulled close and her legs tucked under her on the chair in a way that was private and didn't require any comment from me, and I got used to seeing it. She had a way of asking things straight, not rudely, just without the layer of preamble that most people put between themselves and what they actually want to know. One evening she said, "What did you do before you came to this country?" "Worked a cattle operation in Missouri. Before that, the war." She didn't ask which side. Most people did. She said, "Did you come here because of the war or because of the ranch?" "Because of the ranch. Came with a man named DeVoe, bought out his partner's share when the partner wanted to leave. Met Ruth when I'd been here 3 years. What was she like?" I thought about how to answer that, and then I said, organized, decided. She'd made up her mind about most things and wasn't interested in being argued with, which suited me because I'm not a man who argues. She was good. Good how? She meant well by people, in a practical way, not in a soft way. She meant well and she did something about it. Marin said, I can see why you'd miss her. I said, I don't not miss her. She nodded, went back to her book. That was the end of that conversation, and it was the right place to end it. The garden by August was producing. She knew what she was doing in a garden. The plants came in neat and strong, and the things she'd transplanted had taken. She started putting up preserves, using the jars I had in the cellar that hadn't been used in 2 years. The cellar started to smell different, full of something. I noticed it and couldn't name what it was for a few days, and then I recognized it. It smelled like a house where someone was making provision for the future, and I understood that that was not a smell I'd been living with for a while. One evening I was in the barn later than usual, working on a fence section that had come in off the east pasture needing repair, and she came to the barn door and said, "Supper's cold." I said I'd be in shortly. She came and looked at what I was doing. I was down on one knee with a section of split rail and a mallet, fitting the rail back into a notch in the post. She watched for a moment, then picked up the other end of the rail and held it while I set it. She didn't ask if I needed help. She just saw that I did. When it was done, she let the rail go and dusted her hands together and turned to go back to the house. I said, "Marin." She stopped. I said, "I want to say something." She turned, her face in the last of the evening light. She waited. I said, "I know this is a work arrangement. I know that's what it is, and I'm not pushing past that. But I want you to know that you've made this place." I stopped. Tried again. "The house is a house again. I'd lost track of what it was like for it to be that. I don't quite know how to say what I mean." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to say it." "I know I don't have to." She looked at me with a kind of steadiness that I felt in my chest. Then she said, "It's a good place. It was worth walking 12 miles for." I said, "You can have it, whatever I can give you of it." I meant it the way it sounded, which was probably more than I'd intended when I started the sentence. But I didn't take it back because it was true. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the barn and the house and the dark line of the mountains where the last of the light was going, and she looked at me. She said, "Let me think on that." September, she didn't leave. I noticed this is all I'm saying. I noticed she didn't leave. She had been paid each week without fail, and I had never asked her for anything that wasn't part of the arrangement, and the arrangement had been working well. But an arrangement can work well and still be an arrangement, and an arrangement has a natural end point, and I had not pushed past thinking of it as an arrangement because I had not been sure she thought of it as anything else. But in September, she rechinked the gap in the bunkhouse wall that had been letting in draft, which was the kind of thing a person does when they intend to spend a winter somewhere. And she asked Cleet, when I took her in to the post for supplies, if he could order a second thicker blanket for her, which was the kind of thing a person does for the same reason. And when I was sick for 4 days in late September with something that got into my chest and laid me down flat, she came in the morning with a cloth wrung out in cool water and changed it when it went warm, and brought broth, and sat in the chair by the window and read her book in the afternoons, and did not make me feel that being down was a thing I needed to apologize for. On the 4th night, I was sitting up against the headboard, which I hadn't been able to do for 3 days. She came to the door and I said, "Come in," and she came in with the lamp and looked at me and said, "You're better." "Getting there." She set the lamp on the dresser and sat in the chair. She had the book. She said, "Do you want company or do you want to sleep?" I said, "Company." She nodded and opened the book and read. I watched the lamp and the ceiling and the shape of her in the chair, and the window went dark and she read on, and I fell asleep sometime in there. And when I woke up, she had gone and the lamp was out, but there was a quilt laid over me that hadn't been there when I fell asleep, because she had come back and put it there. And that was the kind of thing that undoes a person who has been holding himself together alone for a long time. In October, I asked her to stay for good. I'm going to tell you how I asked, because the how of it matters. We were on the porch after supper, which was where we had taken to sitting in the evenings when the air had gone cool enough that it was pleasant to sit out. She had her shawl and I had my coffee, and it was one of those October evenings that smells like something ending but not badly, like a fire burning clean. I said, "I want to ask you something." She said, "All right." I said, "I don't want to run the ranch alone anymore, not because I can't, I can, but because I've spent 2 years proving I can and I know I can and it's not the point. The point is that this place runs better when you're here. I run better when you're here. And I'm not asking you because I need a cook or a housekeeper, though you've been both and I'm grateful for it. I'm asking because you're someone I want beside me. She looked at the mountains. I said, I know you had a bad run of it. I know that's a reason for caution, and I'm not asking you to set caution aside. I'm asking you to consider it. Us on this place, building something together. I've got maybe 20 good years of work left in me, and I'd rather spend them next to you than not. The mountains were dark and still. A horse moved in the corral, the fire smell in the air. She said, you bought 3 pies. I said, I know. You didn't have to buy 3 pies. No. She said, I've been thinking about it since August. You've been thinking about what I said in August. I've been thinking about what you meant when you said it. She looked at me. You meant this. Yes. She was quiet. Then she pulled her shawl a little closer and looked out at the yard, the barn, the corral, the dark shape of the garden under the stars, the mountains past it, looking at it the way a person looks at something they're deciding about. She said, all right, Ilias. 2 words not decorated. I put my hand out and she took it. Her hand was warm from the shawl, and she held mine the way a person holds something real, not light, not tentative, just held it. The way you'd hold a thing you intend to keep. We sat like that for a while. The night came on and the fire smell thinned out and the stars got bright, and I sat on my own porch with a good woman's hand in mine and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that I had not simply been managing. It's been 11 years. 11 years since she walked 12 miles on a shoe she'd tied together with rawhide, and stood in the sun outside the Harlow trading post with 3 pies she hadn't sold. I still have the baskets. They're on the shelf in the kitchen and they hold things, odds and ends, a ball of string, some wire she uses for tying back the garden. They've just become part of the house. That's the kind of thing that happens when a place is truly a home rather than just somewhere you're living. She's in the garden right now as I tell you this. I can see her from the porch, moving between the rows, doing what she does in the way she does it, methodical, not hurried, her own woman inside her own work. We have a daughter, 10 years old, who helps her in the mornings and argues about it in a way that makes Marin laugh, which is the kind of sound that a house should have in it, and didn't for a while. I watch her. I think about that $1 I handed her on the trading post step, and the look on her face when she tried to figure me out, and the 12 miles she'd come on a tied-together shoe. I think about the bolt she slid on the bunkhouse door that first night. I think about her hand. I have been lucky in ways I didn't deserve, and I know it. I know it not as a thing I tell myself, but as a thing I feel every morning when I'm out before dawn, and the ranch is still, and I come back in, and there's a lamp on in the kitchen. That's the whole of it. That's everything.